Dumela and hello everyone. The name is Elisa and my surname is Moreki, your literacy mentor in the Velcom class that literally Butwa Machabeng. And as we all know that this is the July month and the month that we actually are celebrating our legendary icon, Mr. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. And today I actually have a story about our icon. And the story is about Mr. Hare meets Mr. Mandela. And our author is Chris Van Veek and our illustrator is Perry Boma. Are you guys ready for the story? Well, I am. Are you? Okay. Well, here is the story. Mr. Hare crept out of his forest home. The morning sky was blue, the grass was green, the trees swayed in the cool breeze, and the forest was full of songs of birds. But on his doormat lay something he'd never seen before, a brand new 200 note. Mr. Hare picked it up. "What is Mr. Leopard doing here?" He turned it around. "Ah, Mr. Mandela," he cried. His left ear curled up and down as he thought. He looked at Miss Secretary Bird, who was watching him from a branch in the thorn tree. "Please call the meeting of all animals," he said. "I have an important announcement to make." She flew off calling, "Meeting everyone at the baobab tree this morning, meeting everyone." "What is it this time?" everyone wondered. Forming a circle under the tree, Mr. Hare stood in the center. He cleared his throat and began. "Fellow citizen of the forest, I have important news for you. This," he said as he waved the 200 note around, "has landed on my doormat. I don't know what it is or what it means, but it has Mr. Mandela's face on it, and I'm so sure of it, it belongs to him." "It has my face on it too," said Mr. Leopard with a playful snarl, "so maybe it belongs to me." Everyone laughed except for Mr. Hare. He was in no mood for jokes. "I plan to go to the city this very hour to return this important note to Mr. Mandela." "What?" Mr. Buffalo asked, shocked. "You will get lost there." "Why would I get lost?" asked Mr. Hare, pushing his chest. "Because you can't read," said Mr. Rhino, pointing his sharp horn at Mr. Hare. "Oh, nonsense," snorted Mr. Hare. "It's true." Mrs. Elephant stomped her feet impatiently. "In the city of readers, almost everyone can read." "Well, what could happen to me?" Mr. Hare asked. Mr. Lion leaped forward, swishing his whiskers in Mr. Hare's face. "Those who cannot read repeat their mistakes over and over again," he growled, "and so will you." Mr. Hare sniggered. "Not me, kitty." With those words, he marched fearlessly right underneath Mrs. Elephant. Then he skipped down the path that led to the city of readers. Soon he began to hear the noises of the city. And then he saw it. He had never been in the city before. He glanced at Mr. Leopard's face on the note. It seemed to be warning him not to go. "But I'm a little wise now," Mr. Hare said. "I am cleverer by far than anyone in City of Readers." And with a leap, he entered the city. First people he saw were schoolgirls and boys. They looked smart in their blue and yellow uniforms. They carried school bags and books. "Good morning, Mr. Hare," they greeted him. "Hi there." Mr. Hare called back, proud that they knew him, but he was curious. How do you know me? We've read about you in our storybooks, a girl said. But how Mr. Tortoise tricked you in a race. They all laughed. Mr. Hare gave them an angry look and went on his way. He saw people rushing for a train and joined them. At the pay station, a man in a smart uniform standing behind the counter held out his hand, and Mr. Hare said, holding up the 200 note, I'm on my way to see Mr. Mandela. The man grabbed the note out of his paw. Hey, Mr. Hare protested. Then the man handed him a 100 rand note. Mr. Hare examined the note on the train. It's turned blue, he said, puzzled. And Mr. Buffalo has taken Mr. Leopard's place. He turned the note around, but Mr. Mandela is still here. He took a carrot out of his pocket and nibbled happily, watching the scenery outside. You see, Mr. Buffalo, he said to the 100 rand note, even though I can't read, I'm on my way to meet Mr. Mandela. Excuse me, sir. Mr. Hare looked up at the man in a blue uniform. You are not allowed to eat on the train. Can't you read that? He pointed to a sign above Mr. Hare's ears that read, Oh, Mr. Hare said, putting the half-eaten carrot back in his pocket. He got off at the next station and soon found himself on a busy street. Bratoti watched Mr. Hare trying to cross the road and saw what he had in his paw. 100, he said, licking his lips. He walked up to Mr. Hare. You seem lost. My brother, he grinned. I'm Brazoti. I'm here to help new visitors to our new city. I'm Mr. Hare. He shook hands. And I'm on my way to Mr. Mandela, Mr. Hare said, to give him this. He held out the banknote. Ah, said Brazoti. Mandela is my best friend. I'll take it to him. He grabbed the 100 rand and disappeared into the crowds. Mr. Hare was not happy about how things were going. He wanted to meet Mr. Mandela himself and shake his hand. But now all he could was turn around and go back home. And what would he tell the animals about meeting Mandela? No. He decided, must find Bratoti and take back the banknote. Quickly, Mr. Hare whipped through the bustling crowds, leaped over moving cars, and darted in and out of shops. And there he is. Mr. Hare spotted Bratoti in Mapiri's peri-peri chicken shop, chomping away on a 50 rand box of wild wings. Hey, Bratoti, Mr. Hare said, give me back my note. Bratoti got such a fright that some peri-peri sauce got stuck in his throat, giving him a fit of hiccups. Here, he said, handing him over a 50 rand note. Pink, Mr. Hare held up the note, puzzled. And what happened to Mr. Buffalo? But there is Mr. Lion to tell me I need to read to survive in the city. He turned it around, but at least Mr. Mandela is still here. He saw people standing in the taxi queue behind them, and the taxi shelter was a picture of Mr. Mandela. Mr. Hare said, they must be all going to visit Mandela too. He joined in the queue, and when the taxi came, he got in. Where does Mr. Mandela live? He asked the driver. At the end of the long walk to freedom, my friend, he said with a friendly smile. I'll take you there. They rode for half an hour past a school, street hawkers, down a highway, past a church, through a suburb. Finally, the driver stopped at the taxi rank. Your stop, my friend, said the driver. Just walk up this road until you get to a big house with a big gate with a guard outside the gate. That will be 30 rand. And he took the 50 rand note out of Mr. Hay's paw. Mr. Hay was about to protest when, your change, sir. The driver shoved a note in his paw. Mr. Hay looked at the new note. Again, it was different to the last one. Instead of Mr. Lion, it was Mr. Elephant who stared at him. But when he turned it around, there was Mr. Mandela still smiling. Mr. Hay smiled back and began to hop up the long road. On his way, he passed the bakery. He stopped, sniffed the air that was lovely smell. He pressed his face flat against the bakery window and gazed at donuts, pancakes, pies, tarts, fruitcakes, and biscuits. Mr. Hay hopped in the shop. Can I help you, sir? Said a lady behind the counter. I'd like one of these, he said, pointing at the donuts. No, one of those. He showed her a slice of a milk tart, then a wedge of chocolate cake, and a biscuit, apple crumb, and a cook sister. Please, sir, you have to make up your mind. Mr. Hay finally pointed at a Chelsea bun. Ah, the lady smiled. Good choice. She slipped the Chelsea bun into a pocket and handed it to him. The next thing he knew, Mr. Mandela's brown note was in her hands. And when she put it back in his paw, it was green. And who do you think had taken the place of Mr. Elephant now? There was Mr. Rhino warning him about the city of readers. Mr. Hare skipped out of the shop, taking big bites of Chelsea bun and wondering, how many times will Mr. Mandela's note change color before I meet him? Then he saw the guard at the big gate. He skipped up to the guard and greeted him and asked, does Mr. Mandela live here? Yes, he does. I'm Mr. Hare of the African bush. I have an important note for him. The guard said, do you have an appointment? No, said Mr. Hare. I have a note. The guard turned and spoke into an intercom. Sir, I have Mr. Hare from the forest. A deep chuckling voice crackled on in the intercom. Mr. Hare? The great Mr. Hare of the African forest? Yes, Mr. Mandela. Well, sending in. What do you think happened next? Do you think Mr. Hare and Mr. Mandela had a great meeting? Well, let's find out soon enough.